Welcome to our next webinar. This is number 2 in the series. So we're going to split today's session into 2 parts. As the session title indicated, we've got CIS and DRC. So the first part of it we're going to do is pretty much going to be done on sort of a PowerPoint slide. There's not a great deal to demonstrate within the system itself. I've done it by the means of screenshots and words on slides. So to start with, I'll let you read that at your leisure. I'm not going to read it word for word, but we've got the 2 very separate sections within our system that cater for CIS and DRC. And this first part is to do with the CIS and introduced by the government to deal with the perceived tax evasion in the construction industry. We deal with it within our system by calculating the appropriate deductions on purchase orders and then obviously the export to your account system, and also on the sales invoices side when you are the subcontractor for the works. So what I plan to do today is show you how you can set up your system to cater for all this and how it impacts upon MARKUS. So the first part of it is, how do we set it up? Well, it's actually really easy. The whole CIS thing is entirely controlled using nominal codes. And if you're familiar with the sort of purchase orders and anything to do with sales lines, you'll have seen nominal codes cropping up throughout the system. So you will set your nominal code in 2 places to deal with this, and that will be either on the purchase order line itself when you're raising a purchase order, or when you're doing a sales line or an SOR code on a job. There is a field for nominal, and you can see on my slide here, we've got in the setup screens for editing a part and a sales code, I've highlighted where you can set your nominal code up. But also, as you know, when you raise, say, for example, a purchase order, the nominal code that you've set against the part code will appear. So you can see if I move my mouse over here, there we go. That's where we set the nominal code for our parts. And that's where we set it for our sales lines or SOR codes. Now, how that impacts upon purchase orders. When you come to enter your purchase invoice on the invoice entry screen, you get the CIS options popping up in the right place here. So can you see we've got already displayed on here a dummy purchase order for a subcontractor invoice for £100. It was £100 labour and £50 materials. So I appreciate the lines are a little bit small on my screenshot, but you should be able to see here we've got our labour line and our materials. And when we record our invoice from our subcontractor, we are giving you the little box over here on the right hand side to indicate the CIS deduction that's been applied based upon the nominal codes for the order lines on this order. So over here we've got our CIS deduction of £20, which I've zoomed in on so you can see it, and that is from the obviously the 20% deduction on the labour element of this supplier invoice. So that is dealt with from our little setup screen earlier. If I take us back here, this particular labour code, the subcontractor and the net 20%, that is applying the 20% deduction for the CIS, so that when we come to here, you can see we've managed to achieve that in this CIS deduction here. Moving across to the sales side, again, really straightforward. When you've got a nominal code set against your sales line with a CIS deduction on it, it behaves like this on your sales invoice. So I've annotated my screenshot a little bit to give you an idea of where it happens. But once you've generated your sales invoice, you get the deduction as an additional column showing here. You also get your deduction showing in the totals and the subtotals at the bottom, which I've zoomed in on so you can see here. So this example, as you can see, it's the same idea. It's us invoicing for £100 labour and £50 materials. The CIS deduction applying on the labour side of it for 20% results in the deduction of £20 here. So we deduct that from any lines that have got the nominal code set. So to recap, it's entirely done at nominal code level. If you're interested in doing it, you need to make sure you've got your nominal codes set up in that way. And I'll cover that just again in a minute. But this invoice here, you can see this is the invoice sheet itself. If I go to the next slide, you can see what that would look like on an actual invoice. And this is the resultant PDF file that you get as a result of this, what you might send to your client. That would be the sales invoice side and the purchasing side for CIS. So if you need your nominal codes setting up to deal with that, there is a screen. Some of you do have options to set up nominals, but it's quite a basic entry screen. It's basically just, I think you get the option to put in the nominal code and the description. It's usually if you want to add a new purchase nominal, sales nominal, things like adding additional deductions and the like. It is possible to do. We can grant you access to it. Not many people have it. If you do want any guidance or advice on that, do give us a shout. So this is the second part for DRC. There it is. So again, I'm going to have to present that to you so that we get a bit of background for those of you that aren't familiar with it. Domestic reverse charge. I do remember very well when it came in because it was during one of the lockdowns, I think, and we were doing the videos for it and everything whilst working at home and having crazy haircuts that you were doing yourselves. It was obviously designed to reduce VAT fraud within the construction industry. And as we can see, obviously, you can read this for yourself, but applies to transactions between VAT-registered businesses providing services covered by CIS. The bit that people sort of get wrong or commonly asked question on it, and I've underlined the words that sort of in the final bullet point over here. So basically, if any part of an invoice is for works covered by DRC, the whole invoice is covered, and the reverse charge applies to the whole invoice. So that's the sort of quite a key takeaway from this slide. And again, how do we deal with that? Well, we deal with the DRC side because we have the ability to produce sales invoices with the correct wording and any deductions. And also on the purchase invoice entry, we calculate the correct amounts for you when you're recording your supplier invoices, but also when you export to accounts, we provide the correct codes and amounts to go across to your account system, depending on what it is that you export, which depends on your package you're using. So how it works. We can turn it on. It's a system option that once we've turned on, you get an additional drop-down list within the client wizard where you can set the DRC options and basically choose how invoicing for VAT behaves per client. But, and I'm thinking about doing an extra session on this actually, where you invoice and how you set your invoicing arrangements isn't just at your client level. Some of you will realize that because some of you already do this, but you can set your invoicing addresses and what we call the charge address at client level. You can set it at client branch or division. You can set it at the contract or work order type. You can set it at site or an individual job. So each of the points that your job touches, you can have an invoice address set differently depending on the work. So, for example, if you were doing PPM works that got invoiced to a completely different department in a different building to the reactive works, that would probably be dealt with at contract level. And so you can set invoice address and invoice arrangements and account codes at each of those points. And because you can do invoice address at each of those points, you can also do the DRC options as well, because that impacts upon that. Now, your DRC options are shown there. You get 3 choices on your setup. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you that within the client wizard now. So basically to get to this, once you've got it turned on, if you want to be able to set this up for your individual clients, what you do is you step into the client wizard. So hopefully you should be able to see my dashboard of the test system now. I've just bounced off the slides. But the way I always teach people to do it is I start by doing create simple job. And I find my client by just starting as if I'm going to raise a job. And I always step into the client wizard by clicking the plus button at any of the stages that isn't client. And you can see already against the branch stage that I'm at, we've got this option here for the 3 options. But if you step back a level, the most common place that you'll set this up where you set your invoice address at client level only, it would be done at this stage here. And you've got your 3 options. So you've got your option where it's basically just normal VAT rules apply. And essentially what that means is it doesn't mention DRC at all anywhere. You've got your VAT applies because they're an end user and you get specific wording on your invoice around that. And then you've got your zero VAT because you're not an end user, or rather the client isn't an end user. So your three options are set at client level. And as you saw, you can set it at branch, contracts, and so on. Now, how that looks as a traditional Blue Peter moment, here's one I prepared earlier. We have an invoice which looks a little like this, where at the moment I've got this one set with the DRC option here. Reverse charge applies, zero VAT. Now, on your invoice sheet, we get our line here to tell us which option we've got and the VAT arrangements for it. So obviously this one here is a zero VAT, so there is no VAT. But if I just press on the print invoice a moment, down here in the footer of our invoice, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more on it so we can make sure everyone can see. There we go. You can see on the bottom of the template, we have here the net value, no VAT, obviously, because we said it was zero VAT, but we include over here on this side the amount of the VAT that you would have paid. So in other words, you're invoicing your client for this amount, but this is what the VAT would have been. And we explain on here that reverse charge VAT applies. If I step back into the invoice sheet, now a lot of people don't realize you can do this, that if you, let's say, for example, got the setting wrong on your client, or you got the setting wrong on this particular invoice because this particular job was a different arrangement than standard, you don't have to credit the invoice and go through the process of re-invoicing it. In the edit pencil for the invoice summary, if we click to edit, amongst the ability to change some dates, which you may have already known or didn't know that you could do, we can change our option here. So if I said here, for example, reverse charge VAT does not apply, there we go, and I press continue, that's obviously changed the CIS option here, and we've now got our VAT showing here. If I refresh my invoice, there we go. We now present to you, obviously, with the VAT, so that the client is going to pay you this amount here. That's what you're invoicing for, the total value, including the VAT. But we give you the words here on the left-hand side, this to indicate that the customer we're advising is your customer, is the end user, and for this reason, we're charging you VAT. And the other option, if I just press the edit pencil and go back in, which is it doesn't apply at all, simply means that it's not on. It's not even switched on. So if I go back to our normal invoice, this might be what a lot of you have your invoices set up as normal. So in other words, net VAT total and no additional words over here on the left. So again, just to recap, edit pencil, and you can change the invoice without having to credit it. And also, just in case while we're on it, you can also tweak your invoice address if you've got it wrong. And also tax point dates and required dates can be altered without you having to credit the invoice and go again. That was the sales side. In terms of purchasing, there is a system option to say whether it's on or not, but we can also set the default option for any new suppliers. So if you've got loads of suppliers in your system and you're adding them quite regularly, we can set a default on in terms of what the DRC setting would be for every new supplier that you create. But obviously you can edit it as well. And the screenshot you've got on your slide in front of you shows the field where you can edit the option for your supplier. And that does vary depending. So you have got your subcontractors, which is what this one is here. You can only choose these options here. And if you're a supplier of a product, just a supplier, you might well have just the one option, which is reverse charge VAT doesn't apply because supply only isn't covered by CIS. So your options in the drop down that you get do change depending on whether the record you're editing is a subcontractor or a supplier. And that's influenced by the field of supplier type here as well. This is a screenshot of purchase order entry, as I'm sure many of you have seen. When you create your purchase order, we have got this field here, And what that does is it brings in the value that you've set against your supplier setup screen. So whatever was set up in your supplier, when you choose them here, you get them here. So a little demo of that one. I do create purchase order now for my supplier of, I don't know, I think it was a plant. There he is. This guy here is a reverse charge applies 0 VAT. However, if I go to my other supplier here, we can see this changed itself here to reverse charge does not apply normal VAT because this guy is a supplier of a product. If I go to find my purchase order, which again I prepared earlier, here we have a purchase order, which is for my training supplier, where I've currently got it set as reverse charge applies for 0 VAT. And we can see that down here, we've got one line for £250. I mentioned this for sales. You can edit the option at this point as well. So once you've raised your purchase order, it's not too late to change the setting if you've got it wrong. And you can do that by editing the general details, where of course you can change a whole bunch of things to do with the purchase order itself, but you've got the options to change here, which I won't do. So recording an invoice, this is the other point where you see this. So if we hit record invoice, because our supplier, or rather this purchase order, is set to reverse charge applies 0 VAT, the supplier's invoice that we're expecting to record at this point would have no VAT. And so we've already pre-populated the 0 VAT here. And over here, we've got the CIS deduction ready to go because we're using a nominal code that had the deduction applied as well. But we've got our £50 DRC applies here, and that's because we're on this option. If I was to change that to CIS does not apply, let's say, for example, if you were ordering some materials from Screwfix or something, then you'll notice that that changed down here. This all disappeared, and now we've got a bit of a rounding issue where we're expecting £50 VAT. So that would be where your supplier's invoice from the likes of a supplier such as Screwfix, you would need to enter your VAT for it to balance up. But if I just demo that again, put it back to the reverse charge applies 0 VAT, watch what happens to your VAT element here and also down here. We get that popping up here for us to tell us what we're doing. Now, from a user, that's quite straightforward. Basically, what happens at the end of the process, once you've recorded your invoice and you're doing your periodic export to accounts, then we would pass in the export file, I think I alluded to this earlier, we would pass through in that export file the relevant codes to say what's happening with your VAT. That is how we deal with CIS and DRC on both the sales and the purchasing side of MARKUS. So yeah, any questions at all at this point? Obviously, I haven't seen anything pop up on the chat, but if anybody does have any questions, now's a good time to answer them. I'll stick around and we can cover those. If we haven't got any questions, that's me done. Thanks for listening. If you've got any questions that you don't want to ask now and you do want to follow up, then certainly, get in touch. That's not a problem. I mentioned about setting up of nominal codes and setting up of system options. If this is something you want to start using in your system, the system options side we'll need to do for you. And in terms of setting up nominals and supporting you through that, we can help with that too. So do get in touch. And as I mentioned earlier, this was being recorded, so I'll try and get this up on YouTube later today for you. So thanks very much, and hopefully see you on the next one. And if you've got any questions, get typing and we'll answer them.
So you've had a question from Chris, from Lisa, Chris?
Yeah, I can see that one now. I've just loaded up my chat. Please can I have access to get set up nominal codes? Yes, I'm sure we can do that for you. I'm guessing that's, yeah, I think I know. Yep, no problem. I can do that for you, Lisa. Not a problem at all. I'm assuming you're Lisa from Cura. Yes, thought so. That don't let I. Bad to assume, isn't it? We all know what that means. I could have ended up giving the wrong Lisa the wrong permission. Okay. Yeah, no problem at all. I can sort that for you, Lisa. Just I'll do that one after this. Once we've all gone off the call. Okay. I think unless anybody else has any questions, which doesn't seem to be coming in, I'll keep the meeting open for a few minutes, giving people a sort of obviously needing to type them. If you want to ask a question verbally, then I think there's an option to stick your hand up. Do so. We can unmute you and we can have a chat. But okay, yeah, no worries. Thanks. Alicia, is there a way to change wording? The accounts team is asking.
We'll pick that up separately, Chris.
Yeah, that's yeah, we'll pick that up with you, Alicia, no problem. We're in discussions with your guys at this anyway, so yeah. Okay. Right. Well, unless there's no further questions, I'll end the session there. Okay. Yeah. Thank you everybody for joining us. And the next session, we haven't finalized a date, but we'll be in about a month's time. And I think we're doing a session on how MARKUS deals with damp and mold surveys and responses to surveys and that kind of thing. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.